I'm Eric Jacobson, founder of Manufacturer Insights, and I'm also a business growth specialist with iConnection. And I'm here today with Shaun Mader, who's the founder and CEO of Trusted Leadership. Good morning, Shaun.
Good morning. It's great to be here with you.
Today's topic is how to overcome workforce hiring challenges. What we're going to do today is a little bit different. Shaun is a regular speaker for Manufacturer Insights. Today, we're going to turn the tables a little bit, and Shaun is going to interview me while providing additional insights. So, Shaun, before I kick it over to you, tell everyone a little bit about Trusted Leadership and the kind of work that you do.
Great. Thanks. So Trusted Leadership was founded because of the challenges I was finding when I was consulting with companies where they actually had people challenges. So we talk about the whole range of training for leadership, managers, team effectiveness. So sometimes we're working with individuals, sometimes we're doing workshops, sometimes we're doing extended cohort-based learning and strategy. You and I got talking about this topic about the challenges that employers are having with employees at different age levels as well. And we talk about retention, we talk about engagement, we talk about how to have companies and organizations thriving, but we're now talking about the hiring process. How do you get the right kinds of people through the door? And we oftentimes think about getting people, but not how do we attract the right ones. And so I thought it was just a really great opportunity to have this conversation because you've been spending a lot of time talking about the marketing, but in a different way than a company might normally think about that. Normally their marketing is to their customers, but you're now dealing with a whole other avenue of marketing, which is how to market to potential employees. And there's a lot of nuance that I don't think many people know about. Maybe we should just start the conversation there. Why would you say a marketing agency should be part of the HR and recruiting conversation?
Thanks for the question, Shaun. iConnection, we're a website design and web marketing company, and we've been helping manufacturers for over 25 years to grow their businesses. And one of the things that we've seen recently is that a lot of companies may have enough work or want to do more business. However, they don't have enough staff to keep their machines running. In fact, over 70% of manufacturers have stated that their inability to attract and retain workers is their primary business concern. Traditional job posting isn't enough anymore. It's part of the reason why people are struggling. The applicant job pool is just too tight. And so as we talk to manufacturers, we've been hearing a lot about these challenges. The other factor that's come into play is as baby boomers are retiring, it's called the silver tsunami. More people are leaving the workforce as they're aging out. So what we also see statistically is that younger workers tend to stay at their jobs for less duration than baby boomers and Gen X.
Yeah, we're talking about this where there oftentimes is a lot of conflict between senior management and leadership and the kinds of conversations they're having about Gen Z and millennial employees. And that a lot of this generational divide is a huge communication divide. Like it really is safe to say that generations don't see the world in the same way. And one of the topics you and I have discussed is that a lot of times the leadership came of age getting developed and trained in the skills for the 20th century. And Gen Z and millennials are the first generations that are born into a digital world. And those are very different. And the skill sets and the ways of working and what companies need to be doing to be effective and competitive in the 21st century are very different. And so we often see this massive cultural clash. But I think today what we're exploring is how do we actually break some of that up, bring more understanding, and then be able to see the nuance so that leadership is more aware of what younger employees really need, and how do you actually communicate that to them? You've broken this down into some pieces, and you've come up with a process to do that. I'd just like you to walk me through that so that somebody else who's just starting to think about this could start to see this in a little more clear pathway?
Yeah. So before I answer that, I want to ask you something. As we talk about younger workers versus more what people think of as the more traditional way of searching for a job. Shaun, if I were to ask you, how would you go about looking for a position?
The company has to develop their humanistic side and know how to communicate that. I'm looking at a company online. How do they talk about themselves? Do they talk about what they do, or do they talk about their culture? Are they talking about just being a leader in the industry, or is this a kind of place that I would want to work and invest myself and spend time and put roots down? So a lot of times when we go on these websites, they're more customer focused, but that doesn't tell an employee a whole lot. So again, you start looking for a job, you get what the company puts out to you, but ultimately you want to know, does this company actually live up to what it's putting out there? And one of the leading neuroscientists on the topic of trust, Paul Zak, talks about this at length. The top performing companies are the kinds of companies who have these really loyal employee bases in everything from manufacturing to sales and advertising. When you create those companies like that, people want their friends to come work with them. They want to have family members and people like that. And when you start to have that kind of community inside your company, you don't have to worry about attracting and retaining talent. You have your people being your best advocates for you. So the two sides of this conversation is, how do you build that kind of culture where that happens, and how do you as a company communicate that out to the broader population? And that's where, of course, you come in.
No matter what, how people may hear about a position, if they're doing job searches, if they see something on social media, before they pick up the phone and call, reach out to a company, they're going to go look at the website and see what
Absolutely.
is the story that they're telling. As I said earlier, the way it's just not enough anymore to have a careers page on your website that talks about the open positions.
Some list of just here's what we got.
Exactly. So that's why we have really put focus on helping manufacturers to fine tune their hiring campaigns. And what we did is we developed a workforce hiring campaign, a four-step approach to help manufacturers attract workers. So I just want to touch on that kind of high level. So the first thing that we do is we do a discovery with a company to help them identify their culture. A lot of times business owners and organizations don't really think about what is their culture. How would you explain your culture to someone who may be trying to identify if they want to work for your company? So once we've then worked with a company to identify their culture, in some cases we're identifying some things that they never thought about and helping them to build up the gap that may exist between where their culture is now and where it needs to be attractive to job candidates. The second thing that we do is generate content. So content, as we said, it can't just be the title of a job that you're looking for and the responsibilities. It's really defining what is your company like to work for, and what is the culture? What can I expect when I come to work for you? So there are many ways to create content. So content could be including current employee interviews that are recorded. The copy on a website is so important. I was doing some research, and I found a company, when I read the content the words they put on the page, you could see that they had put time into the words that
Hmm.
were there. And I wanted to go work for them. I was so compelled by this copy that they had written. So the images that you use, you can talk about diversity, but what do the images that are displayed on your website, what do they say about your diversity? Are they diverse? So creating content that's going to really resonate with your prospects for positions, that's an important step. And then building out pages. We don't really talk about career pages anymore. We talk about career sections or a series of pages. That's another piece that we as a marketing agency spent a lot of time. Our designer makes sure that they look great. Our programmer sets them up so that it's a good user experience. If someone comes to your website and they don't have a good user experience, maybe they're on a mobile phone and they're having challenges and things just don't display properly, that's a reflection of your organization. And then lastly, once we have these other components put together, it's a stranded asset if it just sits there on your website. So we want to get your content, your story out in front of people who are seeking positions. And that's where the role of social media comes into play. And that's just a kind of a quick overview of our four-part hiring campaign process.
You talk about it in a way that people might find familiar, but in a different area, which is this is what branding is for that a company would do for their customer, right? And what you're really starting to point out to is we have to keep all of that work going on. You would do all of the same branding work, the same kind of content creation, building those pages, advertising to your customers. But oftentimes we don't think about the employee as a customer who's out shopping for a job. In fact, in many cases, what they're shopping for has far wider reaching ramifications in their life. This is about where they're going to invest themselves to come on board, to learn a new skill, perhaps, to pay for their family's needs and their schooling, and where they're going to put down roots. In many cases, that is a far more important customer than if you're selling a $20 product out there. So what you're really talking about is treating your prospective employee as a customer and starting to speak to the things that are really personally important to them.
I love that because in business, we talk about the lifetime value of a customer. But what's the lifetime value of an employee who comes to work for you? And because you've told your story properly, they self-identify as a good fit. And if they stay with you for 5, 8, 10, 15, 20 years, that lifetime value of that employee is incredible.
All right, you're talking not only just the expenses to onboard, train, and then have somebody leave and all of that. Oftentimes it's what, 2.5 times their salary to cycle through them, but also the accumulation of institutional knowledge and all of the kind of expertise that they would carry in the continuity of teams and projects where you don't have people falling out constantly, and the kind of incalculable efficiencies that come from that. To get back to the approach, though, this really does start and end with culture. And like you said, a lot of people, when you ask them, well, what's your culture? It's just the water they're swimming in. They might not know what it is. They might not know how to articulate it. They might not even know what's really working that's special to people or what's not working that they need to improve on. Why is it important, first off, for a company to be able to articulate their culture and communicate that to job seekers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the things I mentioned, helping applicants to self-identify whether they're a good fit for your corporate culture and your company. If you talk about in your storytelling about what it's like to work for your company, other things about your culture, someone may say, that's not really what I'm looking for.
Right.
And you want them to self-screen, because if they don't see that and don't get a feel for your culture, and then you end up hiring them, they leave 3 months later.
Yep.
As you were saying, Shaun, that's a big expense in time, training, etc. So that's important. If they don't see that you welcome them, that you are actively looking at diversity, they may go work for your competitor who does talk about those things. Something that's particularly important among younger workers is your company's values. Are you explaining what's important to you as an organization? So those are the kind of things, if you identify and communicate those aspects of your culture, then job seekers will be better able to identify if they're a good fit for you.
Yeah, and that brings us back to people who are looking for a job are doing online research. They're talking about, if you were the most brilliant company that was acing every category that you just named, but you didn't communicate it, There'd be no way for those people to know that. So people are looking at all this information, and if somebody just says something about their values, whether they live up to it or not, and you haven't actually done a good job at communicating yours, that other competitor is going to get that person. It's not enough just to have it going on internally, but how you communicate it out there, because people really are looking for clues as to who you are, what it's like to be with you. Now, what do you say to people about, well, we don't know what kind of culture we have? How do we even get into that to even know what it is we would want to communicate it outward?
Yeah, this is actually a pretty important topic. It's why it's the first piece of our process. But I do want to also say being transparent and authentic is very important because otherwise there is that misalignment between
Mm-hmm.
what you're advertising, the story that you tell to potential applicants and what they find when they get there. But we can explore that a little bit in a little bit. So when we talk to people about culture, I think a lot of business owners, they're so busy they don't have time to think about it. They may not understand all of the components that make up culture. So what we do is we ask questions to help organizations identify what their culture is and what they should be asking themselves. For example, something that's on a lot of people's minds these days is a work-life balance. What does the company do to promote work-life balance? You don't hear too many manufacturers talking about it, but certainly for younger workers, it's on their minds. What's the company's approach to diversity and inclusion? Someone personally is looking for that is one thing, but it may be something important to them. They may want to work with a company that values diversity. I mentioned Spanish speaking. Do you have bilingual staff? Is it a fast paced environment? Is it collaborative? Is there a team environment? That can be very important to people. Leadership style. Someone may have left a position recently because of situations with management. Work schedules. Another big thing these days is flexibility. As a manufacturer, you may or may not be able to have remote or hybrid positions, but is there work flexibility? Maybe there's job sharing from the standpoint of scheduling. I've seen a lot of manufacturers be more creative in how they do scheduling, but some of them don't think about that. And I can tell you that your job applicants absolutely are thinking about these things. Safety and quality control is important in the manufacturing industry. So what kind of safety protocols do you have in place? What is your onboarding process like? Are there opportunities for growth? Is there mentoring? And of course, things with benefits. Most benefits packages, they're very vanilla. So is there something that you have that makes you stand apart from your competitors? Shaun, I want to ask you, what methods can businesses use to obtain that alignment between their ideal culture and reality so that when workers come in day one, they're seeing what they've been told?
This is probably a big enough question to take days to answer. However, even just all of the things you just went through, all these different aspects of a company, I could imagine people thinking about all those topics and starting to get very nervous or very like this is opening up a lot of can of worms here. And I would offer first that asking these kinds of questions through an exploratory process like you're talking about is actually a real opportunity for leadership. Because a lot of these questions are ones that often don't get asked. The clearer we can get on the gap in the questions like this, the better we start to have targeted and focused actions that we can take. Now, all of your questions do cause a company to have to do some introspection and to look at where are we exhibiting these values and what are the gaps. Those gaps are the sweet spots for improvement. So what I see first is a real opportunity for companies to do their own organizational development in a very intentional way by going through a process like this, a culture assessment. Now, I cannot imagine you're going to have a single company on the planet that does not discover at least some gaps, or really find out that, wow, we've really been neglecting this. No wonder we're having the turnover we're having. That will reveal a lot of answers to some of these unsolved questions. So, depending on where you are, there's a variety of things that companies can do, but I'm going to point to first, at the end of the day, it's, is your company serving your people and their needs? That's the one unifying question. And if you are, you're going to have loyal employees who are going to be happy to work there, who are going to be happy to go through challenges with you, who will rally and have your back if that's what they actually feel coming from you. I'm going to talk about one piece that I think people might overlook in this generational gap. We hear older generations talk about younger generations in pretty condescending ways. Oh, they're overly sensitive. They don't have the work ethic. There might be some details that people are missing. You may have older generation that might not make as many demands, but they also avoid a lot of the technology and a lot of the ways of working that are really needed to be competitive in the 21st century. Now, you might have younger employees who are actually on all the platforms, and they are legitimately overstimulated. This technology is taking a toll on their mental well-being. They might be dealing with things out in the world, like the imminence of the collapsing of certain institutions and structures, global warming. There's actually a lot going on that younger people are dealing with that older generations might not appreciate. Now, that younger generation is also the key to your success. You do want the people who are digital natives, who are seeing the opportunities for how to work collaboratively, how to problem solve. It's really hard for them sometimes to have bosses and managers who are operating in a different era. Inside of all this, you can see there's a communication breakdown. Leadership, the best thing they can do is to really be open to listening for what people need. And it is not always complicated. You talked about acknowledgement in there. Barry Waymiller is one of the all-time great manufacturing conglomerates out there who has built this entire conglomerate simply by acquiring companies and manufacturing companies that weren't working and revitalizing them by focusing on their culture. They have ways of acknowledging their people where they engage the employees to nominate the employee of the year. And they bring in their family and their children, and the employees get to read out why they selected them. Imagine a workplace where people felt acknowledged. They felt like their efforts were being used for a good end, that they were engaged in the ideation process to make better products, better services. Barry Waymiller is just a beautiful case study in and of itself for anybody in the manufacturing field, because it can be done, and people do derive meaning from their workplace, even if the particular work they do on a day-to-day basis might not be the most stimulating. So there's ways to now do this, because we now know that skill sets for the 21st century include a lot of ambiguous qualities. You need to know how to deal with uncertainty, volatility. You need to be able to work collaboratively together to problem solve on the fly. The era of things being predictable and stable are gone. So this younger generation is learning how to keep up with continuous change. So you as a leader need to be able to give them the kind of training and development to do that. So we talk about doing cohort-based learning, doing project-based learning where people learn how to do the skills while learning how to be better leaders, better teammates. You're talking about developing meta skills while working on projects. And there's some very interesting approaches and strategies we have for doing that. How can you accommodate people's quality of life in your work? Some companies will put together resource pages so that the parents can network childcare and carpooling. Or somebody's got a sick parent. If they don't feel comfortable enough to go talk to their manager about working something out so that they can go handle that and come up with a plan, guess what? They're going to leave. So some of this is just real simple Simon human dignity stuff, but it has to come from leadership, that those are the values and those are qualities, and it has to be instituted. And the only way you're going to know if that's happening is if those frontline workers are staying.
To your point earlier, this is a process. Creating your culture, creating your internal leadership environment is you just want to keep moving forward to become best in class.
You're right. And that's the best way that leaders can think about this is that this is an opportunity to start to engage in a clear and deliberate process. Because just think of that. When we said that your employees are ultimately your best advocates, okay, you might have exposed some gaps. Now imagine treating your existing employees and prospective employees all like customers. So, what would that communication strategy look like? If you identify gaps, say, wow, we really have not been serving our employees, and we saw 10 new ways that we could meet their needs, that might look like an internal communications strategy to go to them and say, hey, we saw our gap here. We're taking ownership of it, and we're about to start some new campaigns to support you, enrich your quality of life. Why? Because we value you, we want you to stick around. We're not going to be able to change this overnight, but here are the structures we're putting in place. And when leadership is in an ongoing conversation with its people, appreciate being acknowledged, having leadership show their respect by even acknowledging the elephant in the room in some cases, the challenges, and that the employees are witnessing their leadership putting in good faith efforts to remediate those. You can start to turn around your own existing employees to stay longer, to begin to be willing to be more cooperative, and they will actually tell their friends and their family and their peers, hey, I actually work for a company that's really starting to take care of us and putting stuff in place. I've been really impressed by some of the turnarounds here. You should actually come consider taking a look. So thinking of this as a process and a communication strategy and your advertising and marketing, thinking of your employees like customers, it's the kind of organizational development approach that people pay millions of dollars to have a consultancy come in and do. If I have not been doing this at all, what are some of the kind of building blocks of doing the storytelling?
Employees talking in their own words is going to have a lot more weight than if you as the business owner or your management team are the ones saying how great it is to work for your company or talk about your culture.
If you've got employees who are living examples of what it's like to work here, there's a whole kind of balance of all of those elements that go into this, right?
There always is. So you never know what's going to resonate with someone.
Right.
Photography is my hobby, so imagery is very important to me. And certainly the quality of the video is extremely important. But some people are word people. And that's why I was talking about earlier that the copywriting needs to, we say that the copy sings to someone, okay, that it really resonates with them. It says the things that are important to them. So copy is probably one of the weakest areas that I see in general on websites.
Right.
And for this section, it can make the difference between someone saying, wow, I really want to work for them, or, okay, they've got some open job positions.
Well, and that goes back to the initial part of your process, which is doing the culture work, finding out what are those specific needs. You might have employees who really need to be told that there's room for an advancement and expansion in your career to acquire new skills here. You may have other employees who they want to know that you've got a flexible policy for childcare, or that you help subsidize families, or that you may have things that are related to that. So being able to know what those specifics are becomes your roadmap for the kinds of content that you put out there. Because again, people are out there looking for the things that appeal to them most so that they can, like you said, self-select. Is this going to be a fit for me? Without doing that work and knowing what those marks to hit are, you could have copy that sounds great, but it might not actually connect with what that prospective employee is looking for.
One other thing about video that I want to mention is having video on your website increases the dwell time, which means the amount of time that people will spend on your website. Google loves user engagement. So when people come to a website and they spend time on pages and really absorb the content, whether that's reading good copy or whether it's watching a video, that's very beneficial from a search engine optimization standpoint, but also from that human standpoint. So if you just have some job listings and a small paragraph, they're not going to spend much time on the website. They're not going to
Right.
learn much about you. So you want people to spend more time on your website, and video is great for that.
And by the way, remember, it's all that's the other part too, especially in manufacturing, where there's not as much money and maybe set aside for this. If you lead your competitors in doing that, you stand out that much more. Eric, there are people who might be listening to this who are thinking we already post on Indeed and Greenhouse and all the other job platforms out there. That's primarily where we're getting our inbound or our leads from. Why would we spend a bunch of time developing this out ourselves? How do you make that kind of transition, and what's the kind of the value add in doing that?
First of all, if those things, the more traditional approaches are working for you, you're probably not watching this virtual event. So if you're coming to look for solutions, we don't, if something's working well, keep doing it, do more of it. I think that the first three components in our campaign will help, even if you're just doing traditional posting. The issue comes into play where most job seekers are hanging out in other areas. They get their information, particularly the younger audience, but not exclusively that. 73% of job seekers between the ages of 18 and 34 found their last job through social media. So the fourth component in our process is taking the work that we've done on your behalf and in partnership with you and getting that in front of people who are your potential job candidates. But we want to make sure that your efforts don't become a stranded asset. If you don't get that content in front of the eyes of your prospective employees, then you're not going to solve your problem. Look, if something's working, don't change it. I think that in today's tight labor market, getting your content where people are looking, it may not be those job boards. Maybe you don't want to spend thousands of dollars on headhunters. And I'll say particularly with manufacturers, engineers are very hard to hire. What they look for when they come to your website is going to be a little bit different. We didn't really talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if hiring engineers is important to you, we have to have that discussion because they're going to be very concerned about the investment that you're making in your equipment and technology. Shaun, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I turned the tables on you where you got to interview me. So that was a little different for me, but I really appreciate you doing that.
It's a pleasure as always. And yeah, I love being able to switch it up. To it was great.